Let's stick to Bayern. The other story that's been on our radar is Leroy Sané. I think this is the UK press that has linked him with a potential move to Arsenal. This is the sort of thing that I would instinctively kind of, how do I say this politely, bullshit. I would bullshit it, but I am not this time. I don't think this is necessarily as crazy or outlandish as maybe people think. With Leroy Sané, I do have the sense that although he has had his great moments, and I do think he is an incredible player, and if he had been fully fit for Germany at the Euros, who knows where Germany would have ended up, right? I think this is maybe one of those things with Leroy Sané that has been an issue for him maybe throughout his entire time at Bayern Munich, right? That we've never really seen 100% Leroy Sané throughout an entire season there. Maybe we haven't even seen it since that second year at Man City, right? And then he on the eve of joining Bayern Munich for what probably would have been €100 million transfer at the time, he tore his ACL and the deal was delayed by an entire year and ended up being much cheaper, we should add, right? Regardless, he's still on a significant salary. And, all of these things in mind, he's now 28, he's on a significant salary. Bayern Munich are trying to get younger. They obviously trying to restructure their entire squad a little bit. They're going after young wingers like Desiree Doué. There's several young players in their academy who are knocking on the door really heavily. Yeah, I mentioned it again, the academy, right? But, I get sort of the sense that this isn't maybe as much bullshit as we think. And I don't know if it's going to be necessarily Arsenal, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do see Leroy Sané maybe going back to the Premier League for one more time on a significant deal financially for him personally, simply because I think Bayern Munich wouldn't be necessarily too unhappy to see this deal come off their books.
Yeah, well, look, Arsenal have already rehabilitated one German international in Kai Havertz, so why not another go at it? Leroy Sané. I think you're absolutely right, and it's one of those kind of ones where I do feel like Sané is almost ultimately a victim of circumstance here at Bayern Munich. I know technically he maybe counts as a winger, as a right winger, left winger on the pitch, on paper, but when you actually watch him on the pitch, he's an inside forward, he's more of an inside number 10. I wrote quite extensively about the pretty productive kind of partnership he formed with Harry Kane last season, and I suspect that maybe what's happening here is that the Bayern are trying to look ahead to the future, and for all of Sané's use as a kind of partner alongside Kane, more often than not, he found himself getting in the way of Jamal Musiala. And we saw for much of the season, like Thomas Tuchel trying to find a way to kind of balance that team where you'd have them both kind of playing off Harry Kane. You'd maybe have to push Jamal Musiala out wide. Thomas Müller would sometimes come in and out the side. Konrad Laimer would sometimes have to play a little further forward. And it was just a bit of a mess. And there's maybe just an issue that every time you push Leroy Sané out wide, he just becomes completely ineffective. He's not a winger by any means. He's basically just a proper number 10 at this point in his career, I think. And the problem for Bayern is that they've already got their long-term number 10 in Jamal Musiala, and they can't maybe really afford to have someone like Leroy Sané either sitting on the bench or sulking on the wings, especially when, it looks as though they are kind of going out of their way to kind of bring in more bona fide wingers in guys like Michael Olise, who I should say is, is a very straightforward right winger, so if you've got him joining the club with the intention of playing on the right wing, and you've got Jamal Musiala pinning his hopes on playing number 10 for Bayern going forward, there's no way you're going to be able to play Leroy Sané in that squad going forward unless you find some way to squeeze him in between the two of them and just play no left winger at all, which, I know you've got Alphonso Davies in the team, but I'm not even sure he's capable of compensating for that amount of imbalance in the squad. And yeah, and it comes down to like what we said about De Ligt a few weeks ago. The idea of selling De Ligt isn't because he's the worst of the central defenders they got, it's that he's perhaps the most sellable asset on their books. And, obviously Leroy Sané at 28 years of age is still a player in the prime of his career and a player who's shown that when fit and ready, he's a very good player. And that's really probably the be all and end all of it. I think Bayern obviously have a number of these forward players who they'd love to get off their books. I think obviously Sané, Serge Gnabry and Kingsley Coman are the three obvious ones in that team who maybe you wouldn't want to sell all three of them at once, but you'd probably be looking to move one or two of them on, not just in terms of a transfer fee, but also a wage bill as well. And as far as I can tell, there's just absolutely no interest in Serge Gnabry. There's no major transfer stories I can see regarding Kingsley Coman. But Leroy Sané is a player who's shown what he can do in the Premier League. English clubs know what he's capable of, German international as well. And he's still a very dynamic player. He's a player who can really grab a game by the scruff of the neck when he has to. If Arsenal are a team who are interested in signing him, and there is maybe some logic behind it in the sense that they do seem like a club who probably could pick up a number 10. You kind of look at the makeup of their team, shall I say, and it is kind of missing another attacking central midfielder. Obviously, Martin Odegaard is the kind of obvious one. As their key playmaker. Kai Havertz technically number 10, but plays more of a striker. And this week we're expecting Emile Smith-Rowe to move on to Fulham, and that just really leaves someone like Leandro Trossard as the only backup in number 10. So all the pieces do add up. I would say it would make sense for Bayern to want to sell him. It makes sense for Serge Gnabry. It makes sense for Leroy Sané to maybe move on, considering the way that Bayern are looking going forward. And ultimately, it maybe makes sense for Arsenal to try and sign another number 10.
There's another aspect too, right? Mikel Arteta had Leroy Sané at Man City when he was there as assistant coach under Pep Guardiola. So, he knows the player quite well. And we always have to remember too that Leroy Sané at Man City actually worked out quite well. And I don't think Pep Guardiola was ever really that happy about selling Leroy Sané. This was a player pushing for the move, right? Very heavily pushing for the move because of the salary that he could earn at Bayern Munich. And we know the history of what happened next. Leroy Sané arrives at Bayern Munich. It changes the balance of the wage structure at the club significantly. It is something that the club is, still kind of getting to terms with today. A lot of the stories that you see with the club trying to shed salary was brought in by the previous regime under Hasan Salihamidzic and Oliver Kahn, and it really started with Leroy Sané and their pursuit of Leroy Sané, didn't it? And the salary that they offered him that was so much higher than any other club in Europe was willing to pay for him. And that is, I think, the really fascinating aspect here. But, I don't know if he could maybe necessarily make the same amount of money at Arsenal. Maybe he can. But I do think that Mikel Arteta probably thinks he can get the best out of the player. And I do think, what you said there is really spot on too, that he is still a really good player. And when he's fit and he plays in the right system, then I think he can be an incredible weapon. There's a good reason why a head coach like Julian Nagelsmann took him to the Euros, even though he wasn't fully fit, right? Because there is a belief there that he can still provide a little bit extra. Didn't work out. It was a risk. Didn't work out, sure. But maybe, if he had gotten fit in time, he would have made a difference. And I personally still think Leroy Sané on his day is an incredible player. And I don't think this is necessarily down to Bayern Munich really wanting to sell him. And I'm not even sure it is going to be Arsenal at the end of the day. But I would definitely say that when I see Leroy Sané being linked to another club, and a Premier League club, I actually do think that there is probably a lot of truth to that. And I think that makes this a really fascinating one to follow because, we do also know, and this is maybe a big factor here as well, Stefan, I believe his partner is from the United States, and really had a hard time adjusting to life in Munich, right? And actually did spend a lot of time away from Munich, lived in the United States and had a long distance relationship. I do think that has been somewhat resolved, but the family center or the family often plays a really big role in these kind of things too. So if your partner is saying, hey, I kind of would like to move back to a place where I can speak the language, that's understandable too. And that's, I think, another really big thing here that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, I actually think maybe when he returned to Bayern, his partner actually stayed in the UK.
Yeah, and then LA after that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I can't say for certain. But yeah, and maybe we'll need to see what happens, but it looks like a deal that would make sense for all parties, perhaps.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many different things that go on in a player's life. We have to always remember that. All right, let's move on to VfB Stuttgart.